This is Professor Wham doing part 2 of ICE, a 2-part training video, if you will, about working with the element of ICE, the reality of ICE. And to pick up in a place where I ended, or one of the things I mentioned in the previous video, is the relationship between ice as frozen water here on Earth, is how it most commonly manifests, and ice as a principle that is connected to the stars and its relationship with the stillness of space. Or at least that's the way humans experience the vacuum of space. So, in the Finnish epic, the Kalevala, the evil witch, Lohoi, resides in her frozen northern kingdom of Pohjola, I can never say that right, where she ordered the mighty smith Seppo to create the Sampo, or a wheel or mill of plenty, which churns out complete and total abundance. But Lohoi hoards the Sampo, keeping it from the grasp of humans who must plead with her for but a taste of its riches. Now, the Sampo is said to be filled with stars and is considered to be congruent with the vault of heaven. The vault of heaven in Northern Europe, or the Northern European climes, was a way of describing the heavens as they revolve around the North Star, which was understood to be the great pillar or tree which supports the Lohoi's realm of Pohjola. Now, this is almost identical to the idea of the revolving vortex of Ginnunga Gap that is talked about in Norse mythology, providing the elements of abundance and creation to the earth, even though its origin is in the coldest, darkest place. But the roots of Yggdrasil, the world tree, are to be found there, or to be found in this revolving vortex of Ginnunga Gap. So that really is the greatest esoteric secret of ice. It has 2 aspects: its manifestation on Earth and its connection to the void of space. And so when you are touching ice here on Earth, you are touching the deepest essence of the origins of where we've come from, the stillness, the darkness, the absolute potentiality. Now, I mentioned in the first lesson that working with ice entails that we become familiar with the ancient elder beings that are said to be its guardians, that are most connected to it. I've already mentioned, but did not talk really about these beings, the serpents, the dragons, the giants. Now, in German and Scandinavian story, the frost giants are among the oldest of beings on the planet. In fact, in many ways, they're sort of understood to be the first life forms. And their realm is found, or their realms are found in Niflheimr and Muspelheimr, at the root of the world tree. Most of them are not overly fond of humans, in fact, don't really have much to do with humans. And in fact, part of Thor's fame among the Ausur of the Norse deities rest on his ability to clear Midgard of their influence, using his trusty hammer Mjolnir. So that was the sort of power that Thor had, if you would. But the truth is that if you read the myths carefully, he doesn't really destroy the giants as a people. You know, he may be able to dispatch individual ones of them, but he cannot get rid of all of them, because it's understood that they are simply part of the world. They are part of what makes it possible for the important aspects of ice and its attendant season, winter, to exist. And as I indicated in Lesson 1, ice is essential for the development of mammalian and then human life. You can't really have the temperate earth that we've enjoyed without ice. Now, in Norse mythology, it's also no secret that the gods often consort with and even fall in love with giants. Freyr's wife, for example, is a giant. Loki mated with more than one and gave birth to his children, including Hela. Odin, in the stories, has taken up with several and counted others as his teachers and or friends. They are ancient powers that know secrets about the tree of life, about creation, the esoteric history of the world, and the fates of all the worlds. And in a sense, their worlds actually predated ours. And since they reside in the roots of the world tree, the roots of the world tree are planted firmly in the vault of heaven, all other worlds, including the worlds of the elves and the worlds of the gods and the worlds of humans, are all predicated on the foundation that they have made. Now, some giants like Skadi, the Norse snow goddess, can be helpful to humans who find themselves lost in the snow or starving from lack of food in winter. With the right preparation, and when asked with honest intention and honor, she will help humans find shelter in blizzards and guide hunters to their quarry. You have to be polite, though. You have to be willing to do your work. Now, in various northern mythologies, we have stories of the Stalu, the trolls, the Jotnar. Jotnar is a Scandinavian word for, or an Icelandic word for, frost giant. And the Stalu are the way in which the Sami talk about and the Finns talk about frost giants. And often in a lot of these stories, frost giants, even in the Scandinavian stories, frost giants are sort of made fun of. They're sort of seen as a kind of jokers who can be fooled either by Thor dressing up as a woman or can be seduced in various ways. But it's also true that the giants are understood as being repositories of extraordinary wisdom and knowledge. Mimir is a giant that in Norse mythology, holds the secret that at Mimir's well that Odin is willing to sacrifice one of his eyes for. So let me just let me tell you a story that is indicative of the power that giants might have. And when I talk about giants here, I'm not necessarily talking about just big, Bigfoot-like creatures. Oftentimes, or I have heard oftentimes, that when giants are talked about, sometimes by people who are in the paranormal community, they just equate them with like large Bigfoot or something like that. And the giants were understood to be far older than Bigfoot, far older than, and of a different nature, even among indigenous people in North America who talked about them, even among the Sami who talk about the Stalu and how some of the Stalu, will try to eat people. They are cannibals, or they can turn, they can magically turn into trees or stones, so that people can't see them. They are not Bigfoot. All right, they're understood to be a different type of creature than that. But one of the more interesting stories that I've run across that talks about creatures or beings that might be associated with Stalu or the Jotner is a story that I ran across when I was doing research on the Dyatlov incident, which some of you have probably heard of. This isn't about the Dyatlov incident, but for those of you who don't know what that is, it's a curious thing that happened when it was in the 1950s, I believe it was, when 9 Russian, I guess they would have been Soviet, but Russian students, university students, decided to take a hike into a portion of the Ural Mountains that were known by the indigenous Mansi people there as being kind of a dangerous place to be. These people were all experienced both on mountains and in winter hiking, and they disappeared, and their bodies were found under rather unusual circumstances. And if you're interested in that story, you can look it up. It's called the Dyatlov incident. But there was a book that was written by a Russian a few years ago who was doing his own research on the Dyatlov incident. And he was told a firsthand story by the person who experienced this, a man who was not studying, not looking for an explanation for the Dyatlov incident, but happened to actually just be hiking in the forests in the same general area as where these people disappeared and then were found dead. And he told a very strange story. And I'll just summarize this story for you. He said that he was out hiking. It was in the late fall, and he was hunting, basically. And he came to a large tree, and he set up his campsite, and was preparing for the evening. It was going to be cold. It got dark very quickly because it was in the late fall. And so he was just getting ready for the night. He did have a small fire. He said that he heard footsteps coming towards him from a distance. And at first it sounded like one person, and then it sounded like a bunch of people. And they were very heavy footsteps. And he couldn't figure out who would be walking. He was in a very isolated area. And to his knowledge, he was the only person out there. And he couldn't figure out who would be out there. And he heard them coming. He heard this crowd of beings coming towards him. And he could hear kind of this murmuring sound, like they were talking with each other, but he couldn't understand what they were saying at all. It wasn't Russian. It wasn't any of the other languages that he was familiar with. And it kind of creeped him out a little bit. He didn't know exactly what to do with it. But he was armed, and so he felt like he could probably defend himself if something happened. So as this gathering, this horde, I guess, came relatively close to his position, he stood up. He had a flashlight, he stood up and he shone his flashlight at them and announced his presence. And he was immediately struck with 2 things. The first thing he was struck with, he said, was like it was as if he was struck with a wave of something, and it caused him to almost lose control of his bodily functions. His muscles suddenly became weak. He felt like he was almost fainting. But what was most unnerving about the situation was that it was like they were shining a light back at him, but it was right in his eyes. It was like it was as if you could train a flashlight to be right in someone's eyes. It was that bright. And he fell to the ground. And he said he felt like he heard a voice in his head. He said, I know this sounds crazy, but it felt like I had a voice in my head, and this voice said for him to not look at them, to turn his face away. And between all of those things happening at once, he fell down to his knees, and he was frightened. And the crowd or the gathering continued to pass by him for quite some time. He realized that it was like a horde. It was like it took like 15 minutes for them to pass by him, and every now and then he would. And he was, at this point, he was sitting with his back to them. He was like, his fire was still going, but he was sitting with his back to them, looking at the tree. And every now and then he said he would turn it, he would lift up a little bit and turn his head towards them. And as soon as he would do that, this bright piercing light would pierce into his eyes and blind him, like a reminder, don't look, don't look, don't look. And so he finally just quit looking. And after 15 or 20 minutes, the crowd passed him by, and it went, and the sounds dissipated into the night. And he was, he didn't know what to think, so he didn't get up. He just stayed there the rest of the night. The next morning, he got up to look to see where they had passed, because there was snow on the ground, and there was not a single footprint on the ground where they had passed. Now, he told that story to a Mansi elder, and the Mansi, who are distant relatives of the Sami people, they basically come from the same place in the steppes. Their languages and such have diverged a lot in the thousands of years that they've been separated, but they have a lot of the same kinds of rituals and ideas. The Mansi elder told him that he was lucky, that and explained to them that the giants basically and they have a name for them, had passed by, and he was very lucky that they had not taken and eaten him. And that's a very similar story to the kinds of stories that the Sami will tell about the Stalu, even though this is a very silly picture here that you see here of the Stalu. So we're talking here about beings who are not just Sasquatches. They are larger. They are more foundational. In Scandinavian mythology, they are understood to be the foundations, or among the foundations, of the very things that build the world itself, and the forces of nature, the deep forces of nature. They are much deeper than elementals. They're much more powerful than elementals. If you're familiar with Arabic traditions, you could even think of them as being sort of the primordial jinn. They're in Middle Eastern tradition. There is a category of being that are called jinn, and some of them are understood to be responsible for actually maintaining the physical conditions of the world. That's what their job is, and and they're very powerful and very ancient, and a lot of them are not well disposed towards human beings because humans are kind of in the way. And so you could those are analogies to what is meant by the frost giants. Another category of beings that are sometimes associated with ice are dragons or serpents, even though we tend to think of dragons or serpents in the West, excuse me, as being connected to fire. And some dragons are connected to fire, but there is a whole category of dragons or serpents that are connected principally to ice and to the powers of ice. So what I'm going to be reading to you now are actual teachings that were given to me orally from my rune teacher, who transmitted a lot of this information to me over almost 40 years ago. And these are the kinds of things she said. This is what I transcribed. The meaning of Isa, as I've mentioned, is literally ice. It is often paired with Feo or Kano. Those are two fire runes as fire opposites, and is generally identified with Niflheim, the misty kingdom, which is considered to be connected with Hel. I've talked about all of this. The land and goddess of the dead, and a place from and to which the ancestors come and go. In common usage, the power of Isa can represent both stasis and potential, stagnation, or the gathering together and holding of forces. The power of Isa is often held to not be a very pleasant rune, but those of us who have worked deeply with it have found that Isa is extremely powerful and a container for some of the oldest energies in the physical universe. One of the keys to this energy can be found in another word that often is used to designate a similarly shaped object or directionally focused energy, and that is the term Gandr, Gandr. The word is used to describe the vertical stave of most runic forms and can also be used to describe the spine of a person, a wand of power that the person might be using, or more significantly, the spine of the world serpent, who is sometimes referred to as Jormungand, or magically empowered stave. By the way, the term Gandalf, in Tolkien, his name literally means the wand of the elves, or elf wand. So this links the power of the stave, the upright stave, which is Isa, to the form of the Gandr, or the wand, and to the serpent as sort of the spine of the world. Now, the stories of the Midgard serpent, or Jormungand, are fascinating because even though this being is considered to be one of Loki's quote-unquote evil offspring, without this spine of the world, the very physical nature of the planet would dissolve into its spiritual form. The world tree maintains its manifested form here by being rooted in place along the spine of this worldly dragon. Now, this means, of course, that the dragon serpent is trapped until such time as the world is reborn after Ragnarok. The serpent bites its own tail, circles the world, and holds its shape together, according to another story. Now, obviously, such a trapped being is going to work at setting itself free, and so the energy of the earth is struggling to ascend to the next level, just like everything is. Being in physical form mandates that some of who and what we are is trapped until such a time as it can be released. At that point, she referred me to this rune, Eor, that looks like an asterisk. This is the Anglo-Saxon form of Hegel, which is the H rune that you see right above it. These two runes are linked in some important ways because they both represent fundamental forces of ice that cause fundamental change. So hail obviously causes fundamental change when it destroys a field, but it also contains within it the seed of fertilization, because when hail melts, it becomes rain. And it's linked to Eor, this rune here, this asterisk rune, in the sense that this rune is used as a protective rune. There were forms of it that were actually drawn on the forehead of Vikings going into battle, or it formed the basis of what was called the awful or awesome helm. And it was a protective rune that supposedly allowed people to see their enemies before the enemy could see you, You basically had the eye of the serpent, if you will, and could be protected from their blows in the same way that the scales of a dragon would protect you. So there are too many esoteric things to go into here, but the point is that she was making is that there is a relationship between the protective power of ice and its stabilizing force, if you will, in the world. That's why when the serpent moves, the planet moves. That's kind of how earthquakes were seen, for example. Now, dragons and serpents now are generally only seen as negative creatures in Celtic and in Norse mythology. But there is evidence that this was not always the case, not only in Celtic and Norse mythology, but in some of the other Northern European mythologies, such as in Slavic folklore and myth. There are certain old dragons that have retained a sense of the old veneration that people used to have for them. One of these particular dragons is the dragon Zanitra, and this is actually a more recent picture of Zanitra, or the magically empowered one, in Western Slavic mythology, and I'll talk a little bit more about him in just a minute. But going on a little bit more, according to my teacher, she said, ice in particular is a very powerful, irresistible force when enough has collected. Single snowflakes are very fragile, but clumped together and combined with high winds, enough of them can create a blizzard. Massive glaciers have shaped landscapes throughout the northern hemisphere for the last 100,000 years. And in fact, I will note that where I live in the Hudson Valley, this entire valley has been shaped by a glacier. The Hudson River wouldn't exist without the actions of a glacier. The polar ice caps have tied up water, allowing earth temperatures to moderate, rich coastal areas to form, both of which have made human flourishing and civilization possible. Like fire, ice can burn, flow, and feed off the warmth and fuel inside. Even though fire and ice are often accounted to be opposites, they are really very much alike as well. Now that the ice is melting and fire begins to dominate, water resources are shifting away from forms that humans can use. The dragons of ice have become the dragons of water and fire, and human civilization is challenged in a way it never has been before. Whether the Midgard serpent has released his tail or not is probably yet to be determined, but certainly the delicate stabilizing effect of ice has been compromised. The element of ice, and thus the power of Isa, is the counterpart or energetic opposite to several of the runes. Isa is the yin-yang counterpart of Feo, the fiery, expansive energy, and in the metals, as iron is to gold. Isa is also an opposite of Lagu and healing, as the latter is referencing liquid water. Isa can also be said to oppose Sol or Sewilo, the power of the sun, insofar as that warmth can melt ice. There is a deep mystery here that is connected to what in occult circles has been referred to as the dark sun or solar energy. This is a deep underworld current that links the realm of the dragon to that of the stars, and is definitely, at least from the perspective of this planet, otherworldly or extra or ultra-terrestrial in origin. No more can be said about it here. Kano can also represent a kind of opposing force to Isa if one thinks about how metal to be forged resists the maker and must be made more fluid by heat and an effort of the will. All of these oppositions reveal the various potentials and powers of Isa, indicating how the potential energy of the rune can be used. Finally, the power of Isa can also be seen in iron, particularly wrought iron, and by extension steel. Ice bites as steel bites, and iron can be as cold as a glacier. Like worked iron and forged steel, dragons hold their fire within and have strong armor without. The transformation of ore into something much stronger and sharper with the skilled application of fire was long believed to be a form of alchemy and even magic, the very same magic and power that dragons held secret and wielded themselves. That's part of the reason why in the stories only certain kinds of weapons can be effectively used against dragons. In a sense, such heroes are seizing that magic themselves and turning it against the keepers of it. The stave of Issa is also the blade of a very potent weapon that adversaries face at their peril. Nigel Pennick, and this is me talking a little bit, Nigel Pennick has recorded the tradition found throughout the German North of driving iron nails into posts to either protect a property or send harm to an enemy. This was considered a very potent spell that could stop the actions of an adversary cold, in much the same way that needles are stuck into a voodoo poppet. Indeed, there are Icelandic spells that are virtually identical to the voodoo dolls, so to speak. Now, on a more personal level, and this is me talking, not my teacher talking, Issa and dragons and serpents have been linked in my imagination for a very long time, for reasons that I've only recently begun to understand. I have always worked with my dreams ever since I was a child, and for many years I have had several kinds of recurring dreams. One form of dream involves my being able to turn into a tiny snake, enabling me to escape dangers. Another set of dreams revolves around my life on a different planet or in a different world. This place, it appears, is a purposely built or commandeered rogue planet, built or naturally created out of a substance that resembles lapis lazuli. Its purpose is to promote spiritual healing and refreshment by literally being bathed in starlight and absorbing the heat, light, cosmic rays, and other elements that it passes by in its wanderings. Beings who are drawn to this place for their own nourishment and refreshment are welcome. It is protected by its own power of intention. And apparently, according to my dreams, I am a guardian there. In my dreams, it is a magical place, but it is definitely not for humans, for by our standards, the planet is far too cold for life as we know it to survive. Yet there are living beings there, and I am among them. Our appearance is generally reptilian, but I've come to understand that this is just the only way in which the human mind can visualize the energy density of our bodies, as we are in fact paraphysical beings, and the world itself exists not only in a different location than the earth, but on a different plane as well. I have found myself on this world many times, and the dreams and waking visions of this place generally occur when I am most in need of healing myself. Now finally, the great black iron and ice dragon Zenitra, who I mentioned here, was apparently a distinctive totem beast that was used by Wendish people. These were Western Slavs when they sought to defend their holy city of Radagast from Christian invaders. Yes, Radagast is an actual place. For those of you who are Tolkien lovers, actually Radagast was a West Slavic deity, and he was the deity of hospitality. And there was a citadel of Radagast in what is now Saxony, Germany. And they attempted to defend Radagast. This was during the Wendish or Northern Crusades, as they called them. It was the great attempt of the Holy Roman Empire in Europe to drive out pagans, forcibly convert the rest of Northern Europe. During the closing days of the Crusades in the Middle East, since they had failed so miserably in driving out Muslims, they decided they would drive out pagans instead. So Zenitra, the great magically empowered dragon, was invoked to try to protect the citadel of Radagast, against Christian invaders. Now, on my maternal grandfather's side, I am a direct descendant of those who rallied and called upon the serpentine power of the land to protect them from invasion. Although they ended up losing that particular battle, they were also among the last Western European peoples to convert to Christianity. And to the present day, there are still about 60,000 or so Wends or Sorbians, as they are now called, and they persist as a unique cultural group in Saxony, Germany. And for me, the ice dragon is really a very deeply felt ancestral power. So when people ask me, do you connect with your ancestors? It's like, well, not my biological ancestors, but except insofar as they invoked this great ice dragon. And I've mentioned this linear stave of Isa. The linear stave of Isa can also be seen in various megalithic stones that are found in many places across Europe and Asia. Although the most famous of these are, of course, the standing stones in England, there are megalithic structures in many places. In fact, there's hardly a Northern European nation that doesn't have some example of them. It's just many of them they're not heard about. They're not as big or as famous as Stonehenge. It is generally understood that megalithic stones, whether they occur in groups, circles, or singly, are indicators of some strong force that was recognized by early humans who sought to mark out the spots where this energy, often represented as serpentine, collected and manifested itself in the landscape. And this is one of these megalithic stones. I believe this is in Finland. And this, of course, is very similar to places throughout North America or Turtle Island, where stones and serpent dragon figures are often associated with one another, from the horned snake petroglyphs to the stones connected to the thunder snakes of the Hopi and the Uktana serpents of the Cherokee. Serpents and snakes are associated with the underworld, deep waters, and stones. Although in Turtle Island, at least in the eastern part of the country, and up here in the Northeast, Algonquin and Haudenosaunee people really warn folks not to become too involved with horned serpents because they have a tendency to like to abduct and forcibly marry humans. There are lots of stories about that. This is, like I said, this is a stone in Finland. Often megalithic stones are connected to healing, dreams, and powerful, if not always comfortable, transformations. The author Cherry Gilchrist, who's written a wonderful book about the survival of Russian magic and folklore in the Soviet Union, describes one of these stones, a lone figure on a southern Siberian landscape in Russia, in a remote location for which she will not provide the coordinates because the white stone, as it's called, is still used as a place of pilgrimage and healing all these years after the fall of the Soviet Union. The locals say the stone has been a focus of healing and spiritual work for over 2,000 years at least, a singular location of powerful serpentine Mother Earth energies. There are strict rules guiding where and how women and men may approach and grasp the stone. One must circle it clockwise or face being pulled into the underworld of death. It is not recommended that one be in contact with the stone for too long, else its energies might make you a bit crazy. Shamans today routinely do healing rituals around the stone, and it is said to be particularly effective in healing children. And I will note that a lot of the famous rune stones in Scandinavia, that some of which are tombstones, but some of which are just memorial stones, that have the runes in them. If you look at them, the runes are actually written within the bodies of serpents. So you have the serpent that oftentimes is seen circling a kind of symbolic world tree, and then the runes of the inscription are actually carved in the body of the serpent. This is more from my teacher. Of all the beings, she says that she's encountered, no earthly beings are as powerful as the ice dragons. Despite their name, they are creatures of fire and earth and are only linked with ice because they must live where the cold will balance the heat they generate with their own bellies. During my travels, I invaded the realm, and in exchange for my labors, they granted me a snake skin of my own, to use in limited fashion, and but a glimpse into their magic and knowledge, which exceeds even that of the giants, although there are giants who have consorted with them and have gained some of this knowledge themselves. She often spoke as if Odin was speaking through her, if that makes sense. She would go into trance, and it was as if Odin was speaking directly through her. So I just took these words down because as if they were Odin speaking. So, you know, whether you believe that or not is up to you. But this is her, Odin speaking through her. Of my labors for them I will not speak, as I am still bound by an oath until this world changes into its future form. They are the core of physical reality here, the basis by which all things manifest. These are the dragons. And there is no traveler on the world plains who is not indebted to their pathways, gates, and spiritual infrastructures. But they remain hidden to almost everyone except the bravest of soul travelers, for their form and purpose is foreign to most human minds, and generally one retains contact with them only at great peril. There are occasional humans and other beings from other places with whom one or the other of them will choose as a nexus or contact, but this is rare and cannot really be sought in a reliable fashion. Which, by the way, I will pause here. That has been my experience of the dragons, and of the giants, actually. I have had interior contacts with both, unasked for. I did not seek them. And what I can say is that they are not human in their understanding. You cannot just simply go out and invoke them. If you try to do that, it's extremely dangerous. But if you are open, they may come to you. So ice is one of the ways in which it's one of the practices that you can inculcate in order to possibly experience that. So this is my teacher again speaking as Odin. Despite some of the epithets used to describe me in this Odin, I was not one of those people who could seek dragons in a reliable fashion. I learned what I was permitted to learn from them and sent on my way. And to be honest, that was all I desired to learn. For though they are not evil in the way that evil is meant by most men, they do not think or feel like men, nor do they have the same goals as men, and so to us they are generally quite dangerous and to be avoided. There are some humans on this world who have been taken in, as I've said, and those people seem most strange and otherworldly to other humans, and yet they cannot be touched. That was one of the gifts they bequeathed to me, that of being untouchable by those who would wish to harm. Okay. So, the next thing I'm going to do is talk about what I do to work with ice. All right, and what to do if the beings come to you. And I decided that what I would do is I would talk about this with this lovely picture here, and just a few words here about some resources. There are some resources that you can look at that will give you some stories at least. Probably the best is this particular book, which I think I may have mentioned in some other places. I don't know if you can see it here down here. It's by Maria Philhog. It's called The Great Knowledge, the Yolkanir Stories of Sather and Initiation. And it's a massive tome looking at all of the available sources in Northern Europe. She goes way beyond Scandinavia. In Northern Europe, that look at various types of shamanic practice that have been recorded up until very recently, just even, like in the mid-20th century. And for those of you who listened to the first video and maybe have some issue with the one of the things that I said about the term rune being a Sami word and not being an Indo-European word, all I can say to that is that I know what some linguists have said. I also know what my teacher said. My teacher was Swedish and Finnish, and she's the one who told me that. But I also know that in this book, Maria, The Great Knowledge, she begins this book with Sami traditions. Okay, so, she's going to talk about Scandinavian and Norse and Germanic traditions, but she starts with the Sami and provides a fairly extensive genetic analysis, biological genetic analysis of the peoples of Northern Europe in order to demonstrate how interrelated all these different ethnic groups are, even though they are speaking different languages and have slightly different traditions. They've been interacting, intermarrying, having sex and food with each other for probably 3,000 to 4,000 years. So genetically, it's actually very difficult, unless you're doing very specific types of genetic analysis. It's very difficult to tell these different groups of people apart genetically. So, in working with ice, now there are aspects of ice that are different than other elements. Obviously, on Earth, ice is connected to water because ice is made out of it. But ice also connects to the coldest parts of fire. That's the indigo center at the very core of a candle flame, to Earth itself, obviously, which it most resembles, to air, in that at the deepest levels of cold, even gases can freeze and become liquids or solids. Ice burns without fire, contains and sequesters air that you cannot breathe, silences the running stream, and can cause Earth to shatter and become lifeless. Oh, and also, there are a couple of other books that I wanted to tell you about. This book here, Women of Might and Magic. These are female figures in Finnish mythology. I'll try to put all this stuff in the description. The Finnish Book of the Dead, Gods, Spirits, and Creatures of the Underworld in Finnish Mythology and Folklore. This is a great book. Right here. And a wonderful beginning book of Sami folktales and legends, By the Fire. And this is, I mentioned this a story that's in this book in the very first teaching video. The Sami have a story in here. They have lots of stories about Stalu, or the giants, by the way, and the various things you can do with them, or take care of them, or avoid them, or trick them in order so that they don't eat you. But it also has a wonderful story in here about how ice defeats illness. And when you don't respect ice, when you don't respect the power of ice and the power of winter, you literally invite illness into the village, into your house, and it wipes people out. It's a fascinating little story that basically talks about, how it's describing how measles and smallpox and all these different illnesses made their way into Sami villages, in much the same way that they did in North America. But it's kind of done in the frame of, ice is what, and winter is what keeps these things at bay. All right. So ice at its most cavernous level can cause the activity of any other element to cease. It can turn it off. Used this way, ice is the complete leveler, the ultimate container, the most profound stillness. So it should go without saying that confronting with and working with ice might be troubling for some people, triggering and terrifying some, and creating sociopathic tendencies in others. This is because the power of ice is not fundamentally a human leaning. And I will say this again, even though humans need the power of ice in order to live and thrive in a maximum way, the power of ice is not fundamentally a human leaning or a human tendency. Now, my experience is that it's very difficult to work directly with the beings that are connected directly to ice, such as the frost giants, such as the dragons or the serpents of the world. And if you do so, you must be very careful. Even Odin had to take care, offer sacrifices, bear personal injury. Now, there are some traditions, as I mentioned earlier, such as in most of the woodland indigenous traditions of North America, that generally forbid or warn against such contacts for reasons that we will see. In Scandinavian traditions, such work is subsumed under the general rubric of what is called trolldom, which is a term that is now used to designate popular family, folkloric, and kitchen magic. And there is actually an excellent book about this. There's 2 books called Trolldom if you get on Amazon. Get the one by Johannes Bjorn Garbeck. Not the one by Maria What's-Her-Head. That one is just crap. Okay? Now, while my teacher taught me some basic things, I confess I've always known instinctively about this kind of contact for whatever reason. I think it's a karmic thing, honestly. I think it's because my origins are not from here that I have this ability. So these are the kinds of things that I do. And some of this has been confirmed by research and contact with others who have traditional knowledge. The first thing that you have to do is work towards absolute stillness of mind and body. Now, I used to do this automatically as a child, and I only later learned that these were yogic techniques. But these are some of the things that I did. While lying in bed, practice suddenly tightening and then releasing all the muscles in your body individually. You can start with your arm or your leg or whatever, any part of your body, but learn how to tighten your body as tight as possible and then release. And learn how to tighten just parts of your body, like just the muscles in your arm or just the muscles in your left forearm, and then release. It actually takes a while to learn how to do this. But in time, you'll be able to do all the muscles in your body, and they will become completely relaxed. They will all completely relax and become still. Now, I started doing this as a kid spontaneously because a lot of people don't know this, but I'm on the spectrum. And I actually did this to calm the spasticity in my body caused by that. I used to have tics and, a lot of the weird sort of body movements that people with Asperger's have. And so I actually trained myself to do this, and I learned control over my body by doing this. But it also creates this deep stillness in the middle of the body, which is what you have to be able, and an awareness, which you have to be able to have. Practice breathing in and out of your nose as slowly and silently as possible. In fact, I used to lie in bed and pretend that I was being stalked by something so that I would have to remain as silent and alert as possible. Now, if you meditate, and if you have found the point of stillness, which meditation can engender, move towards that. Experience what that stillness feels like in the body, what it does to the mind. The mind has a real hard time with stillness. And by the way, once you learn this, you can still your mind at will. Which I can do. And I've got a very active mind, but you can still your mind at will. Eventually, you'll be able to instantly adopt the stance of ice, which allows deep stillness and absolute cessation of thought. Now, any attempt at contacting any of these entities should be done after you've had at least a taste of this stillness. Frost giants, trolls, dragons, serpents do not respond to regular ceremony or ritual. Don't think you can create something that they will respond to, because frankly, they don't have to. They don't have a lot of time for human beings. They have jobs to do. That they have work that they are doing in the physical world. Their existence predates ours. They occupy a different realm of creation and will continue to exist if we cease to. They have a different set of tasks and are frankly quite alien to us. So my best advice is to learn how to bear the cold to do without some of your common comforts and to seek more solitude. Ice is not a social element. Its minions are not a civilization. Now, one practice I have developed for myself involves visualizing oneself. And I started doing this a few years ago, and it's very useful. Visualize yourself as a landscape, and your most pressing issues, particularly if they are painful and traumatic, as glacial ice that is pressing down upon your country. Don't turn away from the pressure and the pain, but rather accept it. Don't try to rush or change it. Accept the pressure and the pain and repeat silently, as ice shapes and scours the land with infinite power, so may you shape and scour the country of my heart. As ice shapes and scours the land with infinite power, so may you shape and scour the country of my heart. And allow your sharp peaks and edges to be ground away. And as the ice eventually retreats, as it will for most humans, the debris will be swept away or pulverized, and new waterways will form. Which, by the way, that's how the Hudson Valley was created. Now, another method can be to face what you actually fear directly. I've done this by staying alone inside houses that were haunted, walking alone in the forest in the dead of night, in winter with no light but the stars, something that my indigenous teachers have warned me against, but I have done it anyway. Each such situation is different, but until you can sit, at least for some time, with something that is extremely uncomfortable, you will not have the psychic stamina to confront one of the ice beings. So you have to do something that is uncomfortable for you and be able to sit with it for a long period of time. Now, the trick with ice is that it will force you to confront what you flee from. It will compel you to be silent and humble before powers that you cannot imagine. If you are prone to darkness, however, you must learn how not to be sucked in, because these powers are not human powers. So people who are sociopathic, if they do this, it can make them worse. Or if you have certain tendencies towards the darkness, it could turn you that way, because these are non-human entities. And they don't really care. You know, they don't operate by the same moral compass that we do, that humans do, that we are supposed to. So they don't care if you turn. You know, and they're not going to help you not turn. That's something you have to do yourself. They're operating on their own level of their own morality. From a human perspective, they seem immoral or amoral, not immoral, but amoral. They're actually just operating on a different level of value, but it's not a level of value that we're supposed to adopt. Not at this level where we're at. So methods for your mind include learning about the role that cold plays in winter, about the voids of space. You can use some of those recordings of ice that I talked about in the first tape, if those are helpful. Now, if one of the ice beings appears to you, whether in a dream or in any other way, then you can consider it an invitation for contact, but do not for a minute think that you are going to be in control of that contact. Do not even try. Do not go to them with a list of questions. If they have offered you an invitation, just simply say, I am here. Is there something you want to tell me? Is there a task you wish for me to perform? Is there something that I can help you with? Usually there isn't, but you know, it's in other words, don't come with a list of requests. They cannot be controlled for spell work. Do not try. Do not try. You'll just be fooling yourself. Now, Hela is definitely connected to this realm. My friend Leilani, Hela is definitely connected to this realm and is safer to contact because she is involved with human evolution. So if you want an easier way to kind of segue into this, she is actually a deity form. She's one of the children of Loki, so she is part giant, but because she is connected to human evolution, she can be contacted. All right. So these are the kinds of things that you can, these are the kinds of practices or skills that you can learn by working with ice. You can learn absolute stillness. You can learn the processes of stasis when stasis is important. You can stop attacks. You can disappear. Invisibility actually is one of the powers of ice. Absolute silence is one of the powers of ice. Being an irresistible force in a patient, silent way, increasing your memory, increasing your detachment. I have found invisibility to probably be the best of these powers, but as a human and as a Leo, I don't always like to be invisible, but it's also very useful. The dangers are the dangers of the werewolf, the vampire, and the Wendigo. And this is what happens when that emptiness, when ice becomes a hunger, and it begins to feed on itself. And this is what happens with humans sometimes when they get caught by this. Among Northern European peoples and indigo people of Turtle Island, the indigenous people of Turtle Island, there was a kind of madness that among the Algonquin peoples is called Wendigo madness, and it's what happens when people are caught in these energies. And there are stories about this, about them developing an icy heart, and how this icy heart creates human beings or creates a monster that basically is vampiric, essentially. And that's where the idea of the undead came from. The idea of the undead is that these creatures, they never really died because they're sort of like the ultimate predators, and they need your warmth to keep them alive, the warmth of your blood, the warmth of your life force, etc. So that's sort of the dangerous part of ice. So you have to be aware of that. But those aren't the creatures. Those, a Wendigo is not the same as a frost giant or a Sasquatch. Is not, a vampire is not the same as a Stalu in Northern Europe, or a Jotner. So it's important to understand those distinctions, but also the dangers that may come to you. Because I have felt that around me from time to time. It's an ego temptation for human beings to be able to feel that kind of power in themselves. But even Odin shied away from that. I mean, Odin is mercurial and can be very amoral in some ways, at least for us, in our modern Christian West. But even he shied away from that sort of thing, so he knew better. Don't let it take you. Human beings have a different destiny, a different moral compass. So it's possible to work with ice, but not become ice, if you will. So anyway, this is part 2 of this teaching. I hope that this is useful for you. I'm going to put both of these up I will not be providing transcripts of these on my blog, but just a little bit of an introduction on my blog, so that these will stand alone as some oral teachings for you. And again, there may be people who disagree with what I'm saying. You know, I'm not speaking for the Troth. I'm not speaking for the Asatru Free or Folk Assembly, whatever their names are now. I'm not speaking for any particular occult school. I'm speaking as someone who received these teachings in a direct oral fashion from a teacher who had whose family maintained family traditions of this in Northern Europe, and as someone who has practical working experience, over 40 years worth of working with these energies and these powers. So I can only speak for myself. These are the things that I know. So you can take that and work with that to the best of your ability.